Melissa Collins had never been the kind of person to dream big. At 34, she had lived a simple life in Charleston, South Carolina, working for more than a decade as a travel agent in a small family agency. She enjoyed watching others achieve their dreams: honeymoons in the Maldives, cruises in the Mediterranean, expeditions in Africa. Always with a smile, she organized every detail as if it were for herself, even though she knew she would hardly be able to afford anything like that. It was May, the beginning of the high season, and Melissa was particularly excited. In a few days, she would be flying to Australia for her younger sister Rachel's wedding. Her colleagues, touched by years of quiet dedication, had taken up a fundraiser and bought her something unthinkable: a first-class ticket. For the first time, Melissa would have a taste of the luxury she had so often helped others achieve. And that morning, with her battered suitcase in hand and an anxious heart, she stepped into the airport with a rare sparkle in her eyes. The terminal was bustling with activity, with families hurriedly saying goodbye and executives hurriedly typing on shiny cell phones. Melissa, wearing her favorite light blue dress, a gift from her mother, felt like an outsider in this polished, impersonal environment. But her excitement was greater than any insecurity. With her ticket in hand, she was walking to the boarding gate when her eyes caught sight of a scene that most would rather ignore. A man, his face and part of his arms covered in deep scars from old burns, was discreetly trying to avoid the curious and uncomfortable gaze of the people around him. He was dressed simply in a loose shirt and baggy pants, as if he wanted to disappear into the crowd. Even with his first-class ticket in hand, it was clear that he did not fit in this luxurious environment. And at that moment, without hesitation, Melissa made a decision that would change the course of that day and of her life. Melissa approached the man, feeling the weight of the stares around her, but ignoring them as if the world had shrunk just for that moment. Without beating around the bush, she smiled, held out her ticket, and in a soft voice that sounded almost like a whisper, offered her first-class seat. The man hesitated, surprised, as if he were not used to gestures of genuine kindness. He tried to refuse, but Melissa, firm without being invasive, insisted with a warm smile and a simple, "Please accept." It was a pure offer, without interest, without pity. It was true compassion, the rarest kind. When he finally accepted, with an emotional look and a timid handshake, Melissa felt a lightness in her chest that no padded airplane seat could offer. Without expecting thanks, she simply wished him a safe trip and walked away, feeling at peace with herself. As she boarded, Melissa walked through first class with a mixture of admiration and a pang of silent farewell. The spacious seats, the champagne being poured, the flight attendant's mechanical smiles, it all seemed like it belonged to another life, one she would only touch briefly. She found her new seat in the back of economy class, between a teenager chewing gum with his mouth open and an elderly woman who was taking up part of her space with shopping bags. The seat was cramped, the backrest creaked every time she moved, and the strong smell of frozen food was beginning to waft through. Still, Melissa leaned back, pulled her book from her bag, and tried to make herself comfortable as best she could. She had traded physical comfort for something that deep down she felt was much more valuable. The knowledge that, at least for this day, she had made a difference for someone the world preferred to ignore. The first few hours of the flight were a test of patience. The teenager next to her decided to watch action movies at full volume, without headphones, while the elderly woman snored softly, her head occasionally falling on Melissa's shoulder. Dinner was served on a tray of lukewarm, tasteless food, with flimsy plastic cutlery that could barely cut the chicken. With each small bump of turbulence, the smell of spilled coffee mixed with the stifling air conditioning. Still, Melissa remained calm. Instead of complaining, she thought about the man with the lined face, now sitting in first class, perhaps for the first time in a long time, feeling treated as someone worthy of respect. Every discomfort seemed small compared to the quiet satisfaction that warmed her heart. She knew, without needing reassurance, that she had made the right choice. At one point during the flight, as she was trying to find a comfortable position to nap, Melissa was surprised by a flight attendant who discreetly approached her. In a low voice, the woman said that someone in first class had asked her to deliver an extra blanket and some premium cookies to the kind lady. There was no note, no explanation, just that shy gesture of gratitude. Melissa smiled, pulling the blanket over her tired shoulders and nibbling on one of the cookies, feeling that somehow she was still being cared for. The rest of the flight passed slowly, between interrupted naps, crying children, and boring announcements from the captain. When the plane finally began to descend into Sydney, Melissa looked out the small, scratched window next to her, watching the golden expanse of the Australian coastline come closer, feeling a mix of exhaustion and excitement. Little did she know that this small act of kindness had triggered something much bigger than she could have imagined. Her sister's wedding was everything Melissa had hoped for, and more. Rachel, radiant in a simple white dress, cried as she watched Melissa walk toward her in the small garden, decorated with fairy lights strung on the trees. It was an intimate event, full of genuine love, where every detail seemed to have been handcrafted by people who truly cared. During the reception, amid soft music and laughter, Melissa told her sister and some close cousins about her experience at the airport and during the flight. They laughed, got emotional, and applauded her gesture. But for Melissa, that was only a small part of what she wanted to convey. The value of looking at others without fear, without judgment. That night, as she walked barefoot on the cool sand of Bondi Beach, she looked up at the starry sky and felt at peace. She thought that perhaps this gift from her colleagues, the plane ticket, was not meant for her to live in luxury, but to allow her to give something even greater to someone. The next few days passed quickly. Melissa enjoyed the company of her family, strolled around Sydney, took funny photos with kangaroos, and explored local markets full of colourful crafts. But a strange feeling began to grow in her chest when, already back in Charleston, she received a phone call from an unknown number. It was a woman with a formal voice, introducing herself as a White House communications assistant. At first, Melissa thought it was a joke from a mocking cousin, but as the woman spoke, reality set in almost surreally. They explained that her gesture had been mentioned in a recent speech by Colonel Thomas Garrett, who was to receive the Medal of Honor in an official ceremony. He had told her about the young woman who, without expecting anything in return, exchanged her only first-class ticket to give dignity to a stranger. And now, as a form of recognition, there was an invitation and something more waiting for her. 3 weeks after that incredible call, the impossible happened before the eyes of Melissa's small neighborhood. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, and she was watering her plants on her porch when the dull roar of the rotors cut through the blue sky. She nearly dropped her watering can as the presidential helicopter Marine One descended onto the local high school football field just a few feet from her home. Neighbors appeared in their doorways and driveways, pointing and murmuring in shock. Within minutes, Secret Service agents, dressed in dark suits and mirrored sunglasses, were gently knocking on her door. One of them politely explained that they were there to escort her to a special experience at the request of the president himself. Melissa, still in disbelief, was told to grab a small suitcase and follow them. Amidst the whirlwind of emotions, all she could think was, "This can't be happening to me." Inside the helicopter, Melissa barely knew where to look. Everything was so different from the modest life she had led, impeccable leather seats, onboard technology everywhere, and the impeccable kindness of the officers who accompanied her. She received a small envelope sealed with the presidential coat of arms. With shaking hands, she opened it and read the message written in the First Lady's own hand, thanking her for the courage to recognize humanity where many see only difference. Melissa almost cried, holding the paper so carefully as if it were a piece of her own dream. The destination of the trip was Hawaii, more precisely a military base where few civilians were allowed to enter. During the flight, she was informed that she would have access to experiences reserved for dignitaries, exclusive resorts, private tours, and events organized in her honor. Melissa leaned her head against the helicopter window and, for the first time, allowed herself to believe that perhaps a small act of kindness could indeed change the world, starting with her own. Upon landing in Hawaii, Melissa was greeted as someone special from the moment she arrived. A small entourage awaited her at the helipad, including military representatives and civilian coordinators. They handed her a garland of fresh flowers and a warm smile that seemed to dispel any remaining trace of disbelief. She was transported to the resort in a private vehicle, along palm-lined roads and sparkling white sand beaches. When she arrived at the hotel, Melissa was speechless. The place was almost surreally beautiful, with balconies overlooking the turquoise sea and gardens so manicured they looked like living paintings. Every employee she met seemed to already know her name and gesture, treating her with a gentle deference that was not forced, but genuine. It was a silent acknowledgement that sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear uniforms or receive medals, they just follow their hearts. In the days that followed, Melissa experienced moments that seemed like they had come out of a movie she had never dared to dream of. She visited historic military bases where soldiers greeted her with respect. She took private helicopter rides over active volcanoes, scuba dived in protected reefs, and attended intimate dinners where veteran officers told stories of bravery and resilience. Every detail of the trip was carefully planned to honor her, from the accommodations to the small gifts left on her bed each night. At a special dinner by the sea, she met Colonel Thomas Garrett again, the man who had changed her destiny without her even knowing it. He stood up, walked over to her, and without formality simply shook her hand firmly and said, "Thank you for seeing me." It was only 5 words, but for Melissa it was as if all the effort, all the silent sacrifice of that day at the airport had become something eternal. Dinner by the sea turned into a long conversation between Melissa and Colonel Garrett, under the star-studded sky and the calm sound of the waves crashing on the beach. He told her about his life before the accident, about the missions that left him with scars, but also about the small joys he kept alive during his suffering. Melissa listened to every word with genuine attention, never looking away, showing no pity, only genuine respect and interest. Garrett confided that often it was not the physical pain that weighed most heavily, but the way people treated him, as if he were invisible or an uncomfortable reminder of something they would rather forget. Melissa, with her simple and non-judgmental attitude at the airport, had broken down that invisible barrier without even realizing it. And now, there, between 2 very different worlds that met by chance, a friendship was born that needed no further explanation. The next morning, Melissa received an invitation to attend a private ceremony organized by the military on the base itself. She wore a simple white dress, tied with a blue ribbon at the waist, and tied her hair in a makeshift bun, as she always did for important moments. When she arrived at the location, a small formation of soldiers was waiting for her. They silently presented her with a plaque of recognition to civilian Melissa Collins for reminding the world that true honor is revealed in the simplest of gestures. The plaque was heavy in her hands, but its greater weight came from the emotion that threatened to overflow. For the first time, Melissa felt that her ordinary life, built on small daily acts of kindness and care, had found an echo in something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't the luxury of the trip or the gifts. It was the silent validation that choosing to do the right thing even when no one is looking changes everything. After the ceremony, Melissa had some free time to explore the island as she pleased, but she chose something different than expected. She asked to visit a veterans rehabilitation center where physically and emotionally wounded soldiers were trying to rebuild their lives away from the spotlight. She spent the entire day talking to men and women who carried scars on their bodies and in their stories that the world rarely sees. She sat in conversation circles, heard stories of resilience, and shared her own small gesture of compassion that had brought her here. In every look she received, Melissa saw the silent confirmation that what she had done was not just about a seat on an airplane. It was about restoring dignity, about reminding someone that they still mattered. When she left the center at the end of the afternoon, she felt richer than any luxury resort traveler could have imagined. The night before she returned home, Melissa sat alone on her bedroom balcony, gazing out at the ocean, illuminated by the full moon. The warm Pacific breeze carried the salty scent of the waves, and the solitude of that moment seemed to envelop everything in an almost magical calm. She thought about how it had all started so simply, a kind gesture in a crowded airport, and how it had led her life down paths she would never have taken alone. More than gifts or tributes, what she took away from that time in Hawaii was the certainty that, even in the most ordinary and discreet lives, there is a transformative power in small gestures. A power capable of crossing continents, of changing stories, and of planting seeds that bloom where one least expects them. With a peaceful smile, Melissa closed her eyes and silently gave thanks for the privilege of having experienced something that deep down she had always believed, that goodness, even the smallest of them, never goes unnoticed. The return to Charleston was low-key, just the way Melissa liked it. No fanfare or extravagant receptions. Her colleagues at the travel agency, however, welcomed her with tight hugs, eyes shining with pride, and a small, improvised handwritten sign, "Our everyday heroine." Melissa laughed, moved, and told a few stories, omitting the most grandiose parts, focusing on the human encounters that really left their mark on her. She didn't seek recognition, nor did she want to be seen differently. She was still the same woman she had been before, simple, hard-working, dedicated to making others happy. But deep down, she knew that something had changed forever. Now, she carried within her the certainty that it wasn't necessary to live great adventures or have riches to make a difference. All she had to do was be attentive to others and choose kindness, even when the world around her seemed indifferent. A few weeks later, Melissa received a handwritten letter from Colonel Garrett. He said he had decided to create a foundation to support wounded veterans, and that he would like her to be the honorary sponsor of the initiative. The letter ended with a sentence that would forever be etched in her memory. In a world that so desperately needs heroes, sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply seeing. Melissa smiled as she read it and placed the letter in her most precious drawer. She went back to work, continuing to help clients plan unforgettable trips, but now with a different kind of fire inside her. Because she knew, with the same simplicity with which she once offered her seat on the plane, that anywhere, at any time, a kind gesture can shine a light on paths we cannot always see. Months later, Melissa was invited to a small ceremony at the town hall, where the mayor, local veterans, and neighbors gathered to honor her in a simple but meaningful way. There were no red carpets or camera flashes, just sincere smiles and long hugs. Garrett was there too, this time out of uniform, dressed like any other citizen, but carrying the same quiet dignity. When he stepped onto the small makeshift stage to present Melissa with a symbolic plaque, his words were few, but charged with emotion. "You gave me back something the world had stolen from me, the feeling of being seen as a human being." Melissa fought back tears, looked out at the audience full of familiar faces, and felt richer than she could have ever imagined. Not because of the trips or the tributes, but because she had learned, firsthand, that greatness is built on simple choices. As she walked home that night, walking through the quiet streets of Charleston, Melissa looked up at the sky and smiled to herself. She didn't need anything else. Her life, once so ordinary in the eyes of others, now held a meaning that not even the most exotic travel itineraries could promise. She would continue her humble routine, helping clients make their dreams come true, but with the certainty that, in some way, she was also making her own. She didn't need luxury, she didn't need applause. She just had to remember that day at the airport, the silent impulse that changed everything, and the simple act of kindness that had transformed not only a man's destiny, but her own. There, under the starry sky of her small town, Melissa Collins was finally the author of her own story of greatness.